Alright guys, what's going on? Super Saiyan Zero is back, and this time going to be reviewing Spider-Man Homecoming. So I decided instead of doing two separate reviews, one non-spoiler and one spoiler, I'm going to do two in one. I'm going to start with non-spoiler, and then for those of you that don't really care to see a non-spoiler one and you want to see the spoiler review or, you know, whatever, in the description I'm going to have the link to, well, not a link, but I'm going to have a timestamp in there so you can skip ahead to where we start talking about spoilers. So I'm going to try to keep this first part as non-spoiler-ish as I possibly can. So let's get started. So basically, this is, I guess the best way I can describe it is a coming-of-age movie. The trailers aren't really lying to you. Spider-Man, he's not an Avenger yet. He's still learning how to become one. And so this movie is about Peter trying to win over Tony Stark, more or less, and trying to become an Avenger. So obviously, again, the trailers are showing that Tony is not really paying attention to him and things like that. So he's doing his best, and he keeps trying to get in contact with Tony Stark and Happy and giving them updates all the time. And it's actually really funny at the beginning of the movie. Again, nothing really that I'm spoiling here. At the very beginning, you know, it just shows that he's trying to contact them like so much, and they're not answering him. So that's what this is. It's about him trying to impress Tony Stark. It's about more so Peter Parker than Spider-Man, honestly. And I really liked that. I think this movie, you're going to have two different kinds of people. You're going to have some people that really love it and some people that really don't like it as much because of how much they focus on Peter Parker. This is more, I think, of a high school movie about Peter trying to balance being a normal kid in high school but also trying to be Spider-Man and trying to keep that secret from people and things like that. And I think it's very, very true to the comics. So when I say two different kind of people are going to like it, I think if you're more of a fan of the way Spider-Man is in the comics, you're going to have a much greater appreciation for this movie than maybe some other people that prefer the more action, the more mature type of Peter Parker like we saw in the original Spider-Man trilogy and in the Amazing Spider-Man movies as well. So, which there's nothing wrong with that. You know, everybody has your own taste, but I think everybody more or less everybody can agree that Tom Holland is the best on-screen representation we have seen out of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. He does the best of both of them. He is the quippy, one-liner kind of, you know, Spider-Man guy, funny. This movie was very funny and very lighthearted, but he also does the Peter Parker nerdy kind of thing very well. But they've also kind of modernized a lot of I guess I could say cliches and a lot of other things in this movie. A lot of the kids in this movie seem a little bit more normal than they do back in the older Spider-Man comics, because, you know, you had the cliched, you know, Flash Thompson jock, Peter Parker nerd, and, you know, he picked on him and things like that. It's not necessarily the same in this movie like that. There's not a lot of stereotypes that at least I saw in this movie, at least the first time. I'm going to have to watch it again. And for me personally, this is my favorite Spider-Man movie that we have seen on screen so far, because I just think that they really, really captured what Spider-Man should feel like. You know, him being in high school and having to hide these powers from everybody around him and stuff like that, and how I think personally it would really feel to be a superhero in high school and not telling people. However, the movie is not perfect. It does have its flaws, which I'm not really going to get into. At least my personal opinion in terms of the flaws of this movie are more spoiler kind of territory, so I'm not going to talk about those right here in whenever my spoiler half of the review starts, which is going to be very, very soon here. I will dive more into detail about my negatives with this movie, which for me do not overshadow how great this movie was. Again, I think this is the best Spider-Man movie that we have seen, but in terms of where it stands in the Marvel Universe, I wanted to put it at #1, and I want it to be really, really high on my list, and I think after I watch it a couple more times, it'll be high on my list. But #1, I don't know, because the flaws that I found with this movie, for me personally, as very few as there were, they were kind of big for me, for me, my personal opinion. You know, other people might not have the same opinion, and that's fine. Everybody is allowed to have their own opinions. I get that, I understand that. So I will get more into that in the spoiler review. But Michael Keaton, not spoilery really at all. They didn't necessarily say or show 100% in the trailers that he's Vulture, but I mean, he is Vulture. That's not, you know, that's not really a secret. You can look that up anywhere, and really just about any other review is going to tell you that Michael Keaton is the Vulture. He's one of the better villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think they really put a lot of depth behind his character, especially, and made a villain who, in my honest opinion, as a Spider-Man villain, Vulture's pretty lame for the most part. I haven't read a ton of Spider-Man comics, all the Amazing Spider-Man comics, but I've read enough. I've read the very, I think it's like the second issue of the Amazing Spider-Man. Yeah, because I think the very first issue of the Amazing Spider-Man, he fights Chameleon, and then the second one, I believe, is Vulture. Either way, he's a very early villain in the comic book series, and he's pretty lame for the most part. I mean, as far as I'm aware, I'm not a comic book whiz or anything like that, so he's not a super in-depth character in the Spider-Man comics, but I thought they did a very, very good job of giving him a lot of depth, and there were actually some twists and some shocks in this movie that I didn't see coming. As much as they revealed in the trailers, there are still a couple surprises in this movie, and one very big one, which I am again going to talk about in the spoiler review, which I really, really liked. A lot of other people might not, but again, it's healthy for everybody to have their own opinions. So that's going to be it for this section. I'm going to now move over into the spoiler review. Alright, now here I am in the spoiler section of this review. So I'm going to try as much as I can to not talk as much about the movie as I would like to, because there was a lot of stuff that I liked in this movie. Not a lot of super, super important things that happened in terms of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but in terms of how I feel about Spider-Man, there was a lot of, I think, important little things, you know, in this movie. Obviously, I didn't catch everything. I'm not typically a movie reviewer, so I'm not focusing on every little thing like a lot of other people are. And I've only seen the movie one time. I need to go back and watch it a couple more times, but I said it in my non-spoiler review, and I'm going to say it here again too. I think this is the best on-screen representation of Spider-Man that we have seen. Spider-Man and Peter Parker. Tom Holland really does hold his own in this movie. He really helps carry this movie, and basically picks up right where he left off from Civil War. I don't think he was any better or any worse than he was in Civil War. He was perfect. He was right where he needed to be. And in terms of beating Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire, yeah, he definitely does in this movie, and I'm really looking forward. I believe they said that he's definitely going to be in Infinity War. We know all that. I believe he's also, Spider-Man is going to be the next movie that comes out after Infinity War. I think they shoved that one in there. So I'm really, really looking forward to that for a couple reasons, and I'm going to get into those. So normally for me, I like to start with negatives first and end with positives, but because I have things that I want to talk about when it comes to the negatives, I'm going to start with the positives. So basically, in this movie, like I said in the non-spoiler part of the review, it's Peter trying to impress Tony Stark, trying to become an Avenger, and things like that. Michael Keaton is the Vulture. Him and his crew, I said that there's a lot of depth to his character, and there really is, and you can really kind of connect to him, where him and his crew at the beginning of the movie, it takes place after the events of the first Avengers movie, and they're in the little Grand Central Station area, and they're cleaning up after the big giant alien ship that Thor and Hulk took down in the Grand Central Station. They're picking up after that, and they end up getting thrown off of the site by, like, S.H.I.E.L.D. or the government or whoever is there to clean it up, and he basically tells them, like, this is their job, this is how they provide for their families, and they basically tell him, you know, tough shit, get out of here. So it really brings some depth that he's doing this because he's trying to provide for his family and things like that. He has some accomplices. He has, Shocker is one of them, which you see him a little bit later in the movie. It's still more towards the beginning. He ends up vaporizing him, and then he gives it to, and then he gives the glove to some other guy, and he's like, now you're the Shocker, and stuff like that. So there was two Shockers in this movie, but Shocker wasn't so much in, like in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, how you have, you know, they really, really advertise the Rhino they really advertised Electro, and they kind of advertised that the Green Goblin was going to be in that movie too. So all three of those guys, they tried to like really. I mean, the Rhino was kind of only in the movie for like 5 minutes, but they tried to sell him as he was in the movie. And Electro and Green Goblin were both in this. They shoehorned Goblin in the last like 15 minutes of that movie. You know, it's nothing like that. Vulture is the main villain, and Shocker is kind of a side character that Spidey does fight more towards the end of the movie, but he's not there very long. It's not like a, you know, it was acceptable. It was okay with having him in the movie. I thought that they handled it extremely well, the way he was in it. There were some names that were thrown around for future possible villains. Kind of like, again, I compare it to what they did in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 with Black Cat and the one guy, Smite, or what? I can't remember. I think it was Smite. Anyway, you know, they threw in some names that, like, if you're a Spider-Man fan, you're like, oh, I know that name, and that's going to be important later. So, especially the ending credit scene, we'll talk about that as well. But a lot of this movie really focused on Peter Parker, not as much Spider-Man. This was more about Peter Parker growing up and being in high school, and I really, really think, you know, a lot of movies, I feel like when they try to do the high school, like, kind of scene, they kind of struggle with that. They don't make high school seem as real, you know, if that's the right way to explain it. They don't make it seem as realistic as they do in Spider-Man Homecoming. I think Spider-Man Homecoming does a great job of selling this as a high school movie, and this is a believable high school movie. I really think, you know, for me, as big of a Spider-Man fan as I am, I don't mind when they make changes to certain smaller characters, and even like the main character. If they made some changes to Peter Parker, that's fine. They did a couple things, again, that I didn't really like with him, which, again, I'll explain a little bit later, but Flash Thompson is one of those characters that was changed. He's not really the big, you know, jock kind of beat Peter Parker up kind of guy. Honestly, the actor they got to play Flash Thompson, I think, is smaller in terms of bulk and size than Tom Holland is. But Flash Thompson is actually in Peter's kind of inner circle of, like, their nerdy decathlon kind of, you know, group. And so is Liz Allen and Ned and all these other people. And so Flash, I think, really more has the nickname Flash Thompson, not because he's fast on the football field or anything like that, but because he's fast to try to answer a question, which I thought was really kind of weird, but it was cool all at the same time. Betty Brant was in this movie, but you only saw her name, and she wasn't a prominent character by any means. She didn't have very many lines at all, so I thought it was kind of weird that she was a high schooler too. And then, obviously, the big one at the very end was that Michelle, who was played by Zendaya, is actually, she says at the end of the movie, call me MJ. And that particular scene, I don't know. See, I like the fact that Zendaya is playing as MJ. There was rumors about it earlier before, you know, this movie was even close to coming out that she was going to play MJ. And I was fine with that. I'm still fine with her playing as MJ. I don't like how they introduced her. I thought it was kind of weird because, I mean, like, I'm stupid. I like to spoil things for myself. That was really the one thing I wanted to know, was whether or not she was going to play as MJ. And the things I was reading, I just was expecting it to be more of the reveal of her being MJ was kind of going to be a heart-to-heart between her and Peter. And that didn't happen. She kind of revealed it in front of the decathlon group where they're like, oh, congratulations, Michelle, and she's like, oh, you know, my friends call me MJ. So it was just kind of subtle. It was just kind of like in there. So it was just kind of weird. That was one of my negatives that I had about the movie. But anyway, kind of got sidetracked off into that. But yeah, they just did different things with characters in this movie that I actually liked. They made it believable. They made the high school thing really believable, and I liked that. They had a Ferris Bueller's Day Off reference in that movie when Peter's running because he's trying to catch up to this truck that has a bunch of illegal weapons because he can't swing on the buildings because they're too low to the ground. So he's running through people's backyards like a Ferris Bueller's, you know, Day Off thing. And, you know, when you see the movie, or if you have seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about, or you will know what I'm talking about. I thought that was kind of cool. Even though I personally have not seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I've seen parts of it, and I know the gist of what goes on in that movie. But I thought that was pretty cool. And it was a very, very lighthearted movie, like I said earlier. You know, but so now we'll kind of get more into the spoilerish territory because, again, there really isn't a lot of things you know, in terms of how important this movie is to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, to talk about. A lot of it was really small. His battles were really small. It wasn't like he was swinging all the way across New York. He was kind of in his own little thing. And I did like that he was going through growing pains of learning how to use his powers, and he struggled sometimes. Like the suit that he has from Tony Stark talks to him. It's kind of like his own personal Jarvis, even though it's a girl, and he calls her Karen. He calls her Karen. And so I thought that was really cool, like their interactions. Like he has all the web shooter combinations, and he's trying to sneak up on some of these bad guys in this truck, and he's like firing off these webs back in the distance. You can hear them all in the truck talking as you see him in the background, like messing with the webs. It was really funny and stuff like that. So another scene I really liked was, I guess, I don't know what to call it. It was like a cargo ship or like a ferry or, you know, something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but that was where Peter ended up finding out that they were selling more of those illegal weapons, because that's what he's trying to do. Is he's trying to find this Vulture guy. He's trying to find these illegal weapons, and he's trying to stop them from being sold and stuff like that. So it was really cool. That scene was really cool, where the boat got split in half. And then my favorite scene of the movie happened there, which was after the ship blew up. He was trying to like web it together and pull it back together, kind of similar to the train scene in Spider-Man 2, but not really. And Peter, you know, the suit even told him, like, oh, you were 98% successful, and there was one part of the ship that he didn't connect together, and so the ship started bursting in half, and then he threw out two webs, and he was trying to pull it together, and there was no way he was going to get it done, and then Iron Man showed up and helped him, and so he had a little heart-to-heart with Tony up on the rooftop, which for me was my favorite part of the movie, because Tom Holland and Robert Downey Jr. did some really, really good acting right there, and that's why, to me, I was shocked that that was my favorite scene of the movie. I was expecting it to be some kind of action sequence, and it wasn't. It was a heart-to-heart between them, and just, you know, when they were talking back and forth, and the way that Tom Holland just delivered the line of, you know, I just wanted to be like you. You could just see the disappointment and the frustration in his voice and stuff like that in that scene. And Robert Downey Jr. as well, just the stare that he's giving him, and when he's like, you know, if you're nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't have it. It was just delivered so perfectly, and those two actors are really, really good, and I think that they had a really good chemistry right there. And, you know, even seeing Peter right after that scene when he goes home to Aunt May, and he's sitting there, and he's like in tears, and he lies to her and says that he lost the Stark internship rather than, you know, because she doesn't know that he's Spider-Man. It was just really, really good. That was my favorite little sequence in the movie, is watching that and just seeing how good of an actor that this kid really is, and how good Robert Downey Jr. still is, was really, really good. So after he gets the suit taken away from him, because Tony's telling him throughout the whole movie to leave this whole situation alone because they're going to handle it and stuff like that, and Peter doesn't think that they are, and on that rooftop again, that's when Tony explains to him, because Peter once again went against Tony's wishes and went to go try to stop, you know, this weapons deal from happening, and the FBI showed up and stuff like that, and, you know, Peter's like, you know, you're not listening to me, and Tony's like, I was listening to you. He's like, who do you think called the FBI? And stuff like that, and it just showed that Tony was listening to Peter the whole time, even though it didn't seem like it, and stuff like that. So the homecoming dance is coming up in the movie, and Peter asks Liz Allen to go to homecoming with him. She says yes, all this stuff, and it just is really, really funny when it's revealed that Adrian Toomes, who's the Vulture, obviously, Michael Keaton, ends up being Liz Allen's dad. Was really, really funny, and you could feel the awkwardness between how Peter was with him, because Toomes didn't know that Peter was Spider-Man, at least right there, but Peter knew who he was. So I thought that was a really, really funny exchange. And then the dialogue inside of the car, Adrian Toomes ended up piecing together that Peter was Spider-Man, which I thought was really, really cool. The little scene in the car where he's telling him, you know, don't mess with me. He's like, stay out of my business because I'll kill you and everybody that you love, was really cool. And I think there was a couple bits of dialogue between those two characters right there in the car. Was one of them where he was like, you know, this is the last thing that I'm doing, and then I'm done, because he's trying to provide for his family. And he ends up telling, after Peter leaves Liz at the homecoming dance and goes after Vulture, that's when he has a fight in the little bus loop with Shocker, which again doesn't last very long, but it was enough to be like, you know, it was acceptable to have him in the movie, and his character made sense in the movie. So after that, he ends up stealing Flash Thompson's car, and he's driving around in his little crappy SpiderMan suit to go after the Vulture. And once he finds Adrian Toomes in this thing, Adrian Toomes explains to him, which I think was another really good scene in the movie, that, you know, Peter doesn't understand, because he's a kid, that people like Tony Stark and rich people don't give a crap about poor people like him and Peter and stuff like that. And it was just really good, and he was hoping that maybe one day Peter would understand and stuff like that. And then they have a little fight, kind of sort of fight, but more or less Adrian Toomes drops the, I guess, whatever little warehouse they're in, he drops that on top of Peter. And then my second favorite scene in the movie, which was where, you know, Peter is freaking out, like he sold, like, again, Tom Holland really sold it, of being terrified, because he's crushed under this building that he can't lift, and he's calling out for help, and nobody's gonna help him, and he's practically hyperventilating. And, you know, he looks into the water and he sees his little crappy Spider-Man mask, and it splits his face in half between Peter Parker and the Spider-Man mask, and he hears Tony in his head saying, you know, if you're nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't have it. And then that's where the classic comic book moment of he, like, lifts this freaking thing up off of his back with, like, water dripping on him and shit like that, and he just lifts this thing over him and just discovers that he doesn't need the suit that Tony took from him, that does all this crazy, you know, that does all this crazy stuff for him. You know, goes after the Vulture, has a cool little fight there on this plane. The plane crashes into this little carnival area, out, like, just outside of it, right there on a beach area. And something, again, that I didn't really like about the movie was, okay, that fight scene was really good, and Peter was getting his ass whipped. And the thing I didn't like, one thing about this movie, is it just seemed like everything that happened to Peter wasn't necessarily something he used his wits for, but because it happened by accident. And there was another perfect example of On the Beach, where Vulture had an opportunity to kill him and just end it right there, because he told him he would kill him if he crossed his path again. And he could have killed him, took the Stark stuff, and left. But, I mean, his wingsuit was going to explode, so regardless, he wasn't going to get away anyway, but he didn't know that his suit was going to explode. But he could have killed Peter right there, took the stuff, and left. But he left Peter there for Peter to be able to stop him once again. And then, you know, his suit explodes, and he falls down, and then in true Spider-Man Peter Parker fashion, Peter goes in there and saves the guy that just tried to kill him, which I thought was a really great scene. And at the very end, Tony offers Peter a spot on the Avengers and shows him what I'm assuming is the Iron Spider suit, which we'll probably see him wear in Infinity War. But Peter turns it down. He turns down the Avengers job. He turns down the suit and all that stuff, which for me, again, was classic Peter Parker. And I really loved that. And then the one major complaint I had happened at the end of this movie, which was where Peter got the suit that he was wearing, basically, you know, this shirt that I'm wearing, the suit that he was wearing in Civil War and throughout the whole movie. He ended up keeping it at the end, which kind of irked me. Aunt May ended up seeing him in that suit at the end of the movie, too, so I'm assuming now she knows that he's Spider-Man, which was kind of funny. But that, to me, was my, you know, on to my complaints, which I was kind of talking about them earlier, but that was my major one, was that, you know, I'm fine with him wearing the suit for this movie, because he's learning how to use his powers, he's learning how to do all this stuff, and, like, and, you know, it's cool, it's supposed to be fun. I'm cool with it. He's still trying to impress Tony Stark. He's not coming into his own just yet. This is about him trying to do that. And I think under normal circumstances, that's what somebody like him would do. But I didn't like, it just seemed like when Tony took the suit away from him and is trying to teach him a lesson, he still goes against Tony's wishes at the end of the movie, goes after Vulture, and then he gets rewarded at the end for it, even though I guess Tony admits that he was wrong about him at the end of the movie, so I can understand that a little bit more. But you know, after everything Peter went through about learning that he didn't need the Tony Stark suit, he still ended up keeping the Tony Stark suit at the end. And I don't know how I feel about that. And I said earlier that, like, I'm cool with them changing characters because, you know, we're trying to freshen things up. We're trying to make things different here. We're not trying to do the same thing over and over again in these Marvel movies, but, you know, that's one of those things where I think if you're doing Peter Parker, you can't really change that up. You can't switch that up. You know, Peter handles things, you know, kind of similar to the way Batman does. He makes his own stuff to help him get out of his own situations. And I know Peter's young and he's only 15, so I'm not expecting him to go out and make his own Iron Man, you know, his own Iron Man suit and stuff like that. I'm not expecting that. But I just really hope that in his next movie he gets rid of the suit and he finds ways to do it on his own, because again, the suit was fine for the movie, but in terms of more Spider-Man movies to come, I don't like the fact that the suit talks to him like he has his own little personal Jarvis in the suit. I don't like that. I don't like that it has a bunch of web shooter combinations that are going to get him out of any possible thing that gets in his way, you know, in the movies. And, you know, I don't know how I feel about that. That was my major complaint. I, again, talked about earlier, I didn't like the way they just kind of shoehorned the MJ thing in there at the end of the movie. I'm fine with Zendaya playing as Mary Jane, or I guess, you know, I guess she's not really going to be called Mary Jane, she's just going to be called MJ, because her name is actually Michelle. But, you know, again, I'm fine with her playing MJ. I didn't like how they threw it in there at the end. Yeah, those were some things that just really kind of irked me about the movie. But I mean, again, I'm gonna watch it a couple more times, get a better idea of where I want to put this in my Marvel movies. But all in all, again, I thought this was a great movie. It was definitely the best on-screen Spider-Man representation we've seen. There was a lot of funny moments in it, very lighthearted, not a ton of real danger in this movie, which is cool. I think it's going to build. I think the Spider-Man movies are going to build, and they're going to become darker the older Peter gets. And again, I think that moment with the Vulture where he's like, you know, you don't understand about, you know, where he's talking about how Peter doesn't understand that, you know, the rich people like Tony Stark don't give a crap about them, you know, about poor people and things like that. And I think that Peter's really going to get more of an understanding for, you know, darker tones like that later on, and it's going to be really cool to go back and watch the Spider-Man movies and watch them go from this lighthearted, you know, high school point in your life where your life is supposed to be really, really good to it's getting darker because you're getting older and stuff like that. It's really, really cool. But my favorite parts about the way they did Spider-Man was, again, that in the comics that's how it works. He skips out on things that should be important moments in your life as a high schooler, like homecoming, like, you know, important, like the decathlon event for him that he ended up having to skip. You know, there was important moments in his teenage life that Peter Parker gets to miss out on because he's Spider-Man. And I thought that they really did a good job of showing that in this movie, and I'm really, really looking forward to seeing what more they do with this character. And my complaints with this movie are things that could be changed in later movies, as long as, you know, again, he continues to grow up. Again, I want to see him ditch the Tony Stark suit at some point in these series. I'm fine with him using the Iron Spider in Infinity War because they're probably going to be fighting Thanos in space anyway, and the suit will probably help him breathe in space, so it'll be more understandable. I'm cool with that. Again, fine with that. I just don't want to see him wearing the Tony Stark suit throughout all of his movies, and that's all he wears. I want to see him do things on his own, not using Tony Stark technology. That's my issue with it. But again, issue that can be changed later. All in all, again, really, really good movie. I'm going to watch it a couple more times before I really assess where I want to put it for my Marvel movies. But I think, for me, my Spider-Man bias is going to come into play. I'm still probably going to put it in the top 5 somewhere for me in terms of my favorite Marvel movies. Number 1 for me is still... Ooh, actually, hold on. Let me not tell you that, because I'm thinking about making a list here at some point of my favorite Marvel movies. My top 16, because there's 16 of them now. I still haven't seen Doctor Strange yet. I'm still gonna watch that here in the next day or so, and maybe after that I'll do my order in which, you know, my Marvel movies are. But I mean, there you go. I guess I already said expect Spider-Man Homecoming to be in my top 5 potentially. I gotta go through all of them, man. I gotta review what, you know, where I think certain movies should be. But anyway, that's gonna do it for me. I'll see you guys in the next video. I haven't uploaded a gaming video in a while. I was having some issues. I was trying to get face cam into one of my videos, and I kind of got pissed off that I couldn't do it. I screwed that up, so I'm gonna have to upload. I'm gonna have to upload this video. I'm gonna have to upload the video without my actual in-game commentary. I'm gonna have to voice over it and narrate over it. So I mean, I'll get that up eventually. But again, I'm still trying to find time to do this YouTube thing as a regular thing. So, you know, just bear with me. I'll have that one up there at some point. But until then, I will see y'all later. Have a good one.